Чтобы там была она. Кто она там была? Кто она?
For almost as long as video games have existed, there's been an ongoing conversation about the nature of violence as it relates to the art form. Is Call of Duty turning your child into a serial killer? Are you a bad person for getting all your chumps killed in Darkest Dungeon? And is it ethically wrong? Killer, are you a bad person for getting all your chumps killed in Darkest Dungeon? And is it ethically wrong to simulate large-scale murder for fun? The answer to these questions is ethically wrong to simulate large-scale murder for fun. The answer to these questions is probably not. And that's a little bit annoying, because the never-ending debate about the effects of violence in video games overshadows a much more interesting and much less clear-cut question. What's the difference between violent and non-violent games? Now, don't get me wrong, I love gory, high-octane murder fests like battle royales, genocidal strategy games, RPGs where you murder piles of goblins, the works. But even though these games often differ mechanically and are played very differently, there's something about violent games that feels, I don't know, a little bit samey. It seems like AAA devs in particular are really obsessed with getting players to experience that adrenaline rush of conquest in any way they can. And over time I've found myself becoming less and less receptive to that feeling, even in otherwise really good games. There's only so many times I can annihilate my enemies because I'm just so amazing in video games before I get bored, you know? And that's why it's so great to switch gears and play totally non-violent, peaceful, chill games as a nice change of pace. Stuff like Minecraft, Stardew Valley, or maybe a puzzle game like Return of the Obra Dinn, or even visual novels like Phoenix Wright. Hang on a sec. You seeing this? All these games have significant elements of violence or killing. Minecraft has zombies, Stardew has its borderline mandatory monster mines, and the Obra Dinn and Phoenix Wright might not have combat mechanics, but they're still centered around grisly murders. All of these games have appeared on several top non-violent games lists, even though that's evidently not true. And yet, even accepting that these games are totally and to a degree inherently violent, that doesn't stop them from feeling like significantly different experiences. Inherently violent, that doesn't stop them from feeling like significantly different experiences from what we normally consider violent games, even if they deal with a lot of the same concepts. Which, of course, begs the question, if it's not violence that makes violent games feel kind of samey, then what the hell does?
Как же... Наоборот, ну нет, наоборот. Ну так нет, чего я никто... Почему я не могу уехать отсюда? Почему меня никто на работу не приглашает, блин? Плохо играешь просто. Правильно? Да.
It took me months to finally figure out some sort of answer to that question, and it wasn't until I replayed a very special game called Wonder Song that I finally managed to work it out. And my conclusion is...
Hi, this is Mark Brown with Game Maker's Toolkit, a series on video game design. Playing Bloodborne this weekend has got me thinking about death, and trust me, I've had a lot of time to think. It made me realise just how many games treat player mortality in the exact same way. The screen goes black. If it's a retro game, you lose a life. If it's a modern game, you get a quote from Einstein, and then time rewinds a few minutes and you try the section again. This is how it's worked since the earliest games, and the only thing that's changed is that games have become more lenient, to the point where Prince of Persia drops you back on the last platform you stood on, and the Bioshock games don't even reset dead enemies and looted items when you respawn. But otherwise, this is a mechanic looted item. And the Bioshock games don't even reset dead enemies and looted items when you respawn. But otherwise, this is a mechanic that has largely stood still for the history of video games, and it's starting to feel a bit rote. Having to repeat sections of games can start to grate. Trivializing death to represent a momentary setback can suck out all the tension from a heated action sequence. And from a narrative perspective, these games basically do the Sands of Time thing, of just going, no, that didn't happen. May I start again? So, I want to explore some games that offer more innovative ways of death. Let's start with games that change themselves when you die, to avoid playing the exact same thing over and over again, or to get you out of a rut. This is the cornerstone of the roguelike genre, where a new world is randomly generated when you're killed. Not only does it make death more consequential, but it cuts out repetition and removes the ability to commit the stages to memory. In Spelunky, you have to master the underlying rules of the game because you can't simply learn the level layouts. They change every time you lose. Roguelike adds a unique spin here by changing character's class and traits as well as the castle map. Each time you die, you're given a handful of new heirs to pick from, who might play very differently to the character who just got you killed. And then there's Transistor. When you lose your life in this tactical action game, you lose access to one of your 4 powers and are forced to remix your character's loadout. It's a different type of punish. Kill you like normal and set you back earlier in the level, but they don't simply forget what happened before. Your death leaves an indelible mark on the game, and I'm not talking about painting in blood like in Super Meat Boy. I'm talking about games like Shadow of Mordor, where your death can have massive impacts on the organizational chart of Sauron's army. Orcs who successfully kill off Talion, that's you, become more powerful than me, where your death can have massive impacts on the organizational chart of Sauron's army. Orcs who successfully kill off Talion, that's you, become more powerful and may challenge other captains and rise up the ranks. Plus, they'll remember you.
Hey, you the one I killed before! You ain't no bother at all!
Creating a little dynamic narrative that can lead to a satisfying revenge kill. Now, back to Bloodborne and its predecessors in the Souls series. These are games that take great pleasure in killing you and wiping out lots of hard work by pushing you back to the last bonfire. But they also borrow a mechanic from old MMOs called corpse running, which saw you sprinting back to your dead body to collect your loot. In the Souls games, you spill all your souls and humanity, or blood echoes, when you die, and you must go back to where you fell to retrieve them from your corpse. Death is given greater weight in these games, but that one chance to claim back your stuff means they also feel somewhat fair. And in Zombie U, you don't just go back to a corpse to get your lost loot back. You have to find a zombified version of the last character you played as and defeat them to retrieve your inventory. It's a clever twist, and it largely works from a narrative perspective too. And then there are games that are all about acknowledging death, like in Super Time Force, where your past selves fight alongside you, and iOS puzzler Sometimes You Die, where you have to use your dead body as a platform for your ancestors. There are also games that continue marching on after your demise. Heavy Rain, for example, had moments where one of the 4 main characters could be killed, and this doesn't result in a game over. Instead, the story zigzags to reflect that character's death. A different take on this occurs in DS game Aliens Infestation, which has Marines wiped out permanently when they're killed. You'll have to find replacement recruits hiding in the ship. Sure, it's a slight twist on a 4-life system, and you can probably screw yourself over by
6 years, God no.
Is that we shouldn't be talking about the difference between violent and non-violent games at all, because the distinction is basically pretty arbitrary and it distracts from a much more important issue. But before I can explain myself, we've got to go right down to conceptual bedrock and figure out how a story works and why violence seems to pop up all over the place. Trust me, it'll make sense in a bit. As literally any literature course will teach you, the foundational element of any and all stories is some sort of conflict. Now, for reasons that will become apparent later, I'm not going to use that word going forwards. Instead, we'll say that all stories need some sort of central struggle. In most, if not all narratives, both the characters within the story and the audience outside it are confronted with new situations and ideas they'll have to reconcile with or overcome, causing them to grow as a person or look at the world differently. It's this interplay between people, beliefs and concepts that drives change and ultimately creates tension, a dramatic arc, external and internal dialogue, as well as basically anything else that constitutes our idea of a narrative. To use a boring example, Luke Skywalker's journey to become a Jedi Knight over 3 movies wouldn't be interesting to the viewer, nor would it carry any emotional weight if he didn't have to undergo some sort of difficulty and change as a person to get there. If he was just always talented and heroic and a great leader, then it would have been much more difficult to get invested in and enjoy his story. The same is true for video games. Games are built around giving players opportunities to confront and learn from new systems and ideas before having our knowledge and skills tested. You start off as a fresh-faced noob, you get challenged by the game, learn to overcome those obstacles, and come out the other side better at the game and having had fun doing so. This is a cycle that repeats over and over in basically all games, from mastering the specifics of gunplay in something like Apex Legends, to leveling up in an RPG by killing tougher and tougher baddies, or even by learning how to build your army in an RTS to best destroy your enemies. What you might have noticed here is that all these pretty classic examples are inherently violent. Why? Well, that's because violence is, somewhat unsurprisingly, a very easy and very useful way to express a struggle in a way that all players can immediately understand and empathise with. Doom doesn't need to go through the effort of explaining what these imps want, why you're supposed to hate them, or how you're going to deal with them, because it doesn't have to. You've got a shotgun, these weird looking dudes are trying to kill you, you don't want to die, and the only way to get them to not kill you is to get them first. It's a really easy struggle that feels good to triumph over, and also teaches you what Doom is all about. Even Wondersong, a game all about fixing people's problems with music that I'll get back to later, uses violent themes in its tutorial. Very early on, you get to pick up this cool sword, and you'll quickly realise that you can use your mouse to swing it around. It isn't until the bard messes up and drops the sword that you realise you've inadvertently learned how to sing, a control scheme that would have been much harder to convey without the more obvious physicality of swordplay. Okay, so you probably get that violence is a common theme in media from Hamlet to the Avengers because it's an easy conflict to portray, and everyone's going to empathise with it because no one likes dying. But why go through the effort of explaining why violence is so popular if I don't think violence is what's making a lot of mainstream games feel the same? Well, that's because I don't want to give the impression that we should just make all games violent because it's easy. Games should absolutely cater to a variety of tastes, but I also need to make it clear that games containing violent themes and games that feel violent to play aren't always the same. As we've seen, violence can be used in games that feel quite chilled out and relaxing, and adrenaline-pumping, combative games can be entirely pacifistic. We need to be able to distinguish aesthetic from how we approach and engage with games if we're going to get to the bottom of this burnout feeling. The gory Doom and the lovely, lovely Planet both focus on fast-paced, stressful shooting action. The brutal Viking battles of Northgard see you driving your enemies off an uncharted island with force, but the non-violent off-world trading companies' economic wars are no less cutthroat and end with the same result. Iconoclasts might make a really big point of using non-lethal weaponry, but instead...
Дорого она, значит. Нормально играй, значит, и все, да, ну вот на, вот. Да, вот и есть на самом деле. Вот я говорил, так если ты плохо играешь, надо играть лучше, значит, сильнее надо играть, звук бывает лучше, значит. Сильнее, да. Не связано. Ладно, уехали. На себя. Себя-то не себя. Себя. Да, вот это бессмысленно. Ну да, видишь, что тут. Ну ладно, все. Не себе, не говорят это, себе, да.
Have you ever watched a super satisfying, seemingly impossible video and wondered, I wonder how they did that? Well, the answer is actually most often with 3D rendering, and that's exactly what I'll be showing you guys how to do in this video. So the other day I found myself watching compilations of these satisfying videos and just really enjoying it. So naturally I decided to make this super unsatisfying animation here and post it all over social media. And of course you guys kind of hated me for it, but I thought it was funny. And ultimately, I am a nice person, so I will satisfy your needs and show you guys how to easily create this ultra-satisfying animation in Blender 3D, with all the tips and tricks and secrets on how it's done. Hey, you want to know what else is super satisfying? Having all of your passwords, credit card, and personal info being auto-filled for you online while being stored away in a safe, secure, easy to access.
Не надо это, я говорю, ничего не делаю. Мы все умрем.
Spending the finite source of Marines and then saving the game. But by taking influence from... The biggest issue I see with so-called AI experts is that they think they know more than they do. And they think they're smarter than they actually are. In general, we are all much smarter than we think we are, but much less smart, dumber than we think we are. We are all much smarter than we think we are, but much less smart, dumber than we think we are. By a lot. So this tends to plague smart people. They just can't. They define themselves by their intelligence, and they don't like the idea that a machine can be way smarter than them. So they discount the idea, which is fundamentally flawed. That's the wishful thinking situation. I'm really quite close to, or very close to the cutting edge in AI, and it scares the hell out of me. It's capable of vastly more than almost anyone knows. And the rate of improvement is exponential. You can see this in things like AlphaGo, which went from, in the span of maybe 6 to 9 months, it went from being unable to beat even a reasonably good Go player to then beating the European World Champion, who was ranked 600, then beating Lisa Doll 4-5, who was the World Champion for many years, then beating the current World Champion, then beating everyone, all things simultaneously. Then there was AlphaZero, which crushed AlphaGo 100 to 0. And AlphaZero just learned by playing itself, and it can play basically any game that you put the rules in for. Whatever rules you give it, you literally read the rules, play the game, and be superhuman. For any game. Nobody expected that rate of improvement. If you ask those same experts who think AI is not progressing at the rate that I'm saying, I think you will find that their predictions for things like Go and other AI advancements have.
Хочешь заговорить на английском? Follow me. Привет, меня зовут Алекс Рубанов, и я основатель онлайн-школы английского English. Я приглашаю...
The batting average is quite weak. It's not good. We'll see this. It's not good. Saying, I think you will find that their predictions for things like Go and other AI advancements athletes have, their batting average is quite weak. It's not good. We'll see this also with self-driving. NHTSA did a study on Tesla's autopilot version 1, which was relatively primitive, and found that it was a 45% reduction in highway accidents. And that's despite autopilot 1 being just version 1. So the rate of improvement is really dramatic. I think that's the single biggest existential crisis that we face, and the most pressing one. I'm not normally an advocate of regulation and oversight. I mean, I think one should generally err on the side of minimizing those things. But this is a case where you have a very serious danger to the public. And therefore, there needs to be a public body that has insight and then oversight on to confirm that everyone is developing AI safely. This is extremely important. I think the danger of AI is much greater than the danger of nuclear warheads, by a lot. The danger of AI is much greater than the danger of nuclear warheads, by a lot. And nobody would suggest that we allow anyone to just build nuclear warheads if they want. That would be insane. And mark my words, AI is far more dangerous than nukes. Far. So why do we have no regulatory oversight? This is insane. I'm not really all that worried about the short-term stuff. The things that are, like narrow AI is not a species-level risk. It will result in dislocation, in lost jobs, and sort of better weaponry and that kind of thing. But it is not a fundamental species-level risk, whereas digital superintelligence is. So it's really all about laying the groundwork to make sure that if humanity collectively decides that creating digital...
Нет, ну так невозможно, все ведь понимают, что ты ничего не делай, не будешь деньги получать, как принято считать, по крайней мере. Все равно кто-то будет что-то делать, кто-то будет идти впереди и будет собирать все бабки. Да, то есть, как бы, то есть, ну, я понял уже, смотри, это такая райская пора, когда все роботы будут делать все, а мы как бараны будем тут все играть. Это как бы из примитивной, ну, из очень старой научной фантастики, из примитивной и очень недалекой, скажем, ну, или как хочешь называть. Ну, да. Такого не будет, понимаешь, то есть, как бы, никогда не будет барану, да, понимаю, я понял уже, да. Да, и это нормально, понимаешь. Так такое давно уже тогда было бы, просто уже, да. Пастбище на 60 тоже. Халява, знаешь такое? Быть задарма, может быть. Может, не надо это подарок себе. Жрать, срать и все бесплатно. И хорошо, и всю жизнь. Не надо ничего. Ну, думаю, сам, да. А, ты про меня, что ли, говоришь? Нет. Понимаешь, ты все равно будешь это делать. То есть, как бы, разговора нет, да. Ну, типа того, давать людям, быть, не, ну да, а себе ты не будешь давать, а делать ничего не будешь, что ли? Давать людям это как бы, это не съел, говорится, да. Ладно, не надо. Это у меня, да. Это мужская, да.
Creating digital superintelligence is the right move, then we should do so very, very carefully. Very, very carefully. This is the most important thing that we could possibly do. Well, I mean, there are other things that are on a longer time scale, that, and obviously the things that I believe in, like extending life beyond Earth, making life multiplanetary. I believe in sort of Asimov's foundation series, or the principle that you really want to
Наоборот, это не...
I recommend reading the Foundation series, but
Ну, нет,
it's like if you know that there's likely to be, you don't know,
понимаешь,
there's likely.
как бы мы сейчас даже с тобой говорить про это смешно будет, понимаешь? Нормально, да. Наоборот, да. Ну вот это, что деньги-то делаются сами тебе. Нет, понял.
Likely to be another dark ages, which it seems, my guess is there probably will be at some point. I'm not predicting that we're about to enter dark ages, but that there's some probability that we will, particularly if there's a Third World War. Beyond Earth, making life multiplanetary. I'm a big believer in sort of Asimov's Foundation series, or the principle that you really want to, I recommend reading the Foundation series, but it's like if you know that there's likely to be, you don't know, there's likely to be another dark ages, which it seems, my guess is there probably will be at some point. I'm not predicting that we're about to enter dark ages, but that there's some probability that we will, particularly if there's a Third World War. Then we want to make sure that there's enough of a seed of human civilization somewhere else to bring civilization back.
The best little software out there. I still have yet to see anything else that competes with.
And perhaps
Как ты застрахуешься? Бра, да. Наоборот, я понял. Ну да. И самое смешное, что ты сам сейчас соглашаешься с этим всем. Ну как, все как у тебя понял просто. Ну да. Ну вот это он говорил. Может, представь, говорит, как нравилось. Ну нет, ты только уже... А, это я что ли? Да, ну... Нет, я, понимаешь, я не счетовый человек, у меня денег нету, мне общество даже заработать не дает. Да. Для женщин это хорошо, наверное. Да. Нормально, да. Не знаю, что-то мне интересное. Да. Ну так или иначе. Наверное. Никто не подскажет тебе. Ладно, скажет.
Shorten the length of the dark ages. I think that's why it's important to get a self-sustaining base and perhaps shorten the length of the dark ages. I think that's why it's important to get a self-sustaining base, ideally on Mars, because Mars is far enough away from Earth that a war on Earth, the Mars base might survive. It's more likely to survive than a moon base. But I think a moon base and a Mars base that could perhaps help regenerate life back here on Earth would be really important, and to get that done before a possible World War III. Last century we had 2 massive world wars, 3 if you count the Cold War. I think it's unlikely that we'll never have another World War again. There probably will be at some point. Yeah, it just could be radioactive rubble. So.
Games like XCOM Enemy Unknown, where you build relationships with your soldiers only to see them permanently lost if killed in battle. Infestation gives player death an emotional sting that most games lack. And finally, there are games that give you a second chance, like in Prey, where you're shunted to the spirit world and can play duck hunt against mythical birds to recover health before being sent back into battle. You've also got the buddy system in Far Cry 2, where a mercenary pal can drag you to safety, the defibrillator in Rage that lets you play a mini-game to bounce back to life, and the Last Stand in Mordor, which gives you a second chance in battle. All of the games in this video make your mortality feel more impactful, or they cut out the endless repetition that comes with death, or they manage to reconcile the player's death with the narrative in a smart way. So let's not immediately settle for the exact same game over mechanic that we've been using for the past 4 decades. Take a moment to think whether there's a more interesting way to handle mortality in your game and implement it. Thanks for watching. You can subscribe for more game design videos. Leave a comment if you play a game with clever twist on player death, and please consider supporting the show on Patreon.
Again, I'm not predicting it. It seems like, well, if you say given enough time, will it be most likely given enough time? This has been our pattern in the past. So, but I think that sustainable energy is so obviously really important. That's tautological. If it's not sustainable, it's unsustainable. Well, I think the core technologies are there with wind, solar, with batteries. The fundamental problem is that there's an unpriced externality in the cost of CO2. The market economics works very well if things are priced correctly, but when things are not priced correctly, and something that has zero cost, then that's where you get distortions in the market that inhibit the progress of other technologies. So essentially anything that produces carbon, puts carbon into the atmosphere, which includes rockets, by the way, so I'm not excluding rockets from this, there has to be a price. And that you start off with a low price, but then that price, and then depending upon whether that price has any effect on the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, you can adjust that price up or down. But in the absence of a price, we sort of pretend that digging trillions of tons of fossil fuels from deep under the earth and putting it into the atmosphere, we're pretending that has no probability of bad outcome. And the entire scientific community is saying, obviously, it's going to have bad outcome. Obviously, you're changing the chemical constituents in the atmosphere. So, so it's really up to people and governments to put a price on carbon, and then automatically the right thing happens. It's really straightforward. It sounds like I'm backtracking, but there's actually an argument that more carbon in the atmosphere is actually good, but up to a point. So we might actually arguably have been a little carbon starved. If you go back 200 years ago and say, okay, or 400 years ago, we had like 200. $80, 290 parts per million of carbon. We're probably a little carbon starved. Now we're about 400, just past 400 mark. I think somewhere in the 400s, probably okay. We don't have to worry about sequestering carbon or anything like that. Now, if this momentum keeps going, and we start going up to 600, 800, 1,000, 1,500, that's where things get really squirrely. And the sheer momentum of the world's energy infrastructure is leading us in that direction. So it's just very important that the public and governments push to ensure that the correct price of carbon is paid. That will be the thing that matters. Well, right now, the other things that are really stressing me out in a big way are AI, obviously. There's somebody who, I can't remember his name, but had a good suggestion for what the optimization of the AI should be, what's its utility function. You have to be careful about this because you say maximize happiness, and the AI concludes that happiness is a function of dopamine and serotonin. So it captures all humans, injects your brain with large amounts of dopamine and serotonin. Like, okay, it's not what we meant. Well, I like the definition of like, the AI should try to it captures all humans, injects your brain with large amounts of dopamine and serotonin. Like, okay, it's not what we meant. Well, I like the definition of like, the AI should try to maximize the freedom of action of humanity. Maximize the freedom of action. Maximize freedom, essentially. I like that definition.
Привет, я Дуду Дрон. Я помогаю бескодным созданиям вроде вас. выполнять свои обещания. И я в этом очень хорош. Переходите по ссылке, поделитесь своим обещанием, и я помогу вам не забыть о нем.
Мочки надо, да. Вот нет, наоборот, ну нет, надо. Че варить будешь теперь? Че буду варить? Опа, опа. Наоборот, вот нет, наоборот. Да. Наоборот, да. Вот и на самом деле. Ты серьезно, да, наоборот, только Хорошо, скажи, какой мне еще? Как относиться? Почему я должен отказываться от таких? Да. Какая нафиг разница? Ты все равно всю жизнь будешь заниматься черти чем, но тебе это не будет нравиться, понимаешь? Например. Ну или, ну какая нахер разница? Ну да. Тебе и себе, и людям надо угодить. По-своему скажи, все то же самое получится. Ну разве нет? Нет? А отдельно угождаешь людям, отдельно себе. Ну, как бы. И нормально, что ли? И... Ну, нет, наоборот, я понял, что наоборот, да. Ну, то есть ты, да, понимаю. И долго это будет длиться? Да, то есть, как бы, и так, это так и должно быть, что ли? Или как бы? А ты сдохнешь, кому легче станет? Всем людям, наверное, легче станет. А ты, ну, себя поугождал, что дальше, да? Как бы кому-то надо посмешище просто. Ну, совпасть может как-то должно, нет? Чтобы время, ну, как минимум, да. Ну, смотри, сам рассуждай, да. Так то же самое все говорят, блин. У тебя вот и все. Так что нехрен. Не против, плати мне деньги, сейчас надо. Я шутил уже просто. Definition, да, наверное, да. Вот что тебе надо? Define, да. Я не понимаю, экстаз состояния, да. Ну хорошо, экстаз, и чё? Да. Скилл. Ты помнишь, что мужик это не экстаз. Экстаз это я вот родился на свет от папы. Он экстаз. Как бы да. Женщины тоже экстаз, наверное. Это не важно. Ну это все так. Да, то есть, ну ладно, экстаз, и что дальше? Нет. Дело не, кстати, ну что, наркоту будешь торговать, что ли? Чё, о чем речь-то? Скилл твой какой? То есть, что ты умеешь, да? То есть, ну, ладно, давай, учись, все равно будет скилл, понимаешь? Да. Появится обязательно кто-то, кто лучше тебя делает это, по бочке учиться. Более, потому что он заметил и будет делать как бы по скиллу за это платить, понимаешь? Он вышли на технологию продаж из этого, понимаешь? Начинает другие инструменты использовать, а ты такой, я такой, да, понимаешь, он тебя просто, да. То есть, честно говоря, да. Вот и все, да. Людям здесь нужно какие-то, да, просто обыватели. Вот ты так не обыватель, да, не обыватель, ни хрена, ты особый. Ну нет, ну ладно, пусть даже так. Я согласен, да, я в том, что, ну, потребителем, да. Ну, ты все равно же тоже потребитель. Обыватель, ладно, допустим, мутное слово, допустим. Да, ну, как бы негативно, наверное, скажем, да. Потребитель. Все равно ты, ну, что ты, еду, воздух не потребляешь, что ли? Да, то есть, как бы, не знаю, электричество, то есть, тебе деваться некуда. Ну, что ты вообще ничего не потребляешь, так ты что, надо сидеть на пальме тогда? Ты пальму потребляешь тогда тоже, потому что рано или поздно там кто-то будет жить, и тебе скажут, иди отсюда, я понял, что слезай с пальмы, и ты сама, да. Это частная территория, там, все, типа, аренда помещения, потому что, да. Ну, не важно. То есть это обман. Ну нет, он так не думает, что ли, да? Он для про себя и говорит, ну ладно, происходит. Ну нет, это так. невозможно. То есть не потребляя прожить невозможно, правильно? На небе может и можно, хотя это тоже что потребляет, то есть все равно ты будешь, ну, условно, я просто условно, если ты будешь, то значит условно, если, ну я просто так говорю для маразматиков, если будет какое-то я, то оно тоже будет, а из чего понимает, то есть просто так, это для шизиков чисто, то есть вдруг, ну нет, мне плевать, потому что, я тебе просто говорю, ну да без разницы. Ну хорошо, ты ничего там потреблять не будешь, ладно, давай туда сразу, давай. Помочь тебе, нет? Не, я не специалист вообще. Ладно, забудь. Просто так, это не важно. Это даже не сути касается, там еще, да, ты понял, там, да, можно туда можно что угодно запихать, хоть Аль-Каиду, хоть что угодно, там можно списать что угодно туда, понимаешь? Можно вайгалу, кстати, туда тоже, можно, да много чего можно рыбы, там, знаешь, разные рыбы, жареные и камбала, видел такое, да? Например, как бы ладно, давай просто реальность какую-то, да, посмотрим. Просто чисто вот объективка, что вот точно есть, как бы, да. Ну это как бы, это сложно, это уже сложно. Почему тогда в дурках они лежат, считаются больными людьми? Все они такие, ну давайте выпустим, они все здоровые. А все равно на попечении, понимаешь, и мало того, что попечение, еще и самое, да. То есть, делайте вывод, ну, короче, да, потреблять это не так уж и плохо, и это невозможно, как бы, да, без этого. Нет, что ли, опять, возможно, не потребляя жить, что ли, думаете? Ну, я не знаю, ну и как? Нет, потреблять это разные вещи, как бы, да. Ну, я про себя и говорил, да. Ну не будем. Ну, невозможно жить не потребляя ничего. Это не бывает такого, это просто. Ну просто это, ну, как бы желание самого себя обмануть, да. Не бывает такого, да. Очень комфортная территория. Ну хорошо, я не очень понимаю, что вы имеете в виду, смотри. Вот я живу на юге, например, рядом с пальмами. И ничего не потребляю там, кроме пальм, солнца и бананов, да, типа, которые как бы бесплатные, да. Типа того, да. Одежду. Ну, я ее не потребляю, я могу голый ходить там. Не буду же я китайскую это самое, или сам себе свяжу что-нибудь, да. Женщина моя тоже такая будет, да. Ну а как, ну а что теперь? Ну, например, ну и женщины тоже не потребляют, значит, ну ладно, потреблять это не надо, да, просто, ну без женщин, значит, просто так, да, в целом так, или там без мужчин, неважно. Одинокий организм, короче, который не потребляет кого-то или ничего там. Да, то есть, как бы, ну, ты согласен, что долго ты так, ну, как бы, такого не бывает. Даже если ты себя запихнешь, все равно не получится, что ты ничего не потребляешь, да. Да. Ты же не Маугли, даже Маугли и тот потребляет там, да, понимаете, вот. Ну, то есть, это очень плохо, что ли? Ну, да, понимаю. Да, ну, наоборот, да. Вот это есть, то есть, это плохо потреблять, ну, я понял. Просто ты сам не замечаешь, все равно вот воздух, тут микробов каких-нибудь, кислород у нас бесплатный вроде как, вода у нас тоже, ну не совсем, да, так сказать, тогда территория бесплатная, да, я говорю, кто-нибудь скажет, это моя частная территория, ладно, тебе так говорю. Нет, вот о себе он так думает. Я ничего не потребляю, что ли? Что это имеется в виду? Ну вот, ну ладно. Как это, я не понимаю, я вообще не знаю ничего себе. Что за бред, блин. Ну да, надо надо производить, потому что потребляешь что все равно, это сам автоматом получается. Нет, не получается, потому что надо их брать просто и все, да. Брать надо себя, значит, да. Ну нет, вот это он имеет в виду. Что значит так? Нет. Ну ладно, вот давай не будешь потреблять еду. Вот не потребляй еду, давай. Что еще не потребляется? Там что еще надо? Одежду не потребляй, да. О чем все говорят? О себе они так говорят. Ну вот это имеется в виду. Я, ну, из чего? Да, я-то здесь. Ну невозможно, потому что прожить ничего не используя невозможно, потому что. Ну нет, ну иди в джунгли там, живи голожопом. Ну ладно, я понял. Он про это и говорит тебе. Ты что, нормально что ли? Ну, вот это он и говорит. А, ну типа, ну тогда, ну да, типа вот он это имеет в виду. Вот это есть, вот это было самое. Условный нуль, да, условный такой. А еду будешь откуда брать? Кто ее будет растить? Она сама будет расти. В нашем прикладе, в теплице, которую сделает доктор Джек. Нет, разрешите. Не понимаю я. Типа райское древо, да. Ну, ну вот это он имеет в виду. А, ну это... Нет, ну это мир. Короче... Да я с ума сошел, что ли? Прям вот не есть, не пить не будешь, ничего, никак. Ну ладно, пискать станет, то есть не есть, не пить не будешь. Даже вообще ничего. Рот тогда можно убрать тебе, да? А чтобы говорить из него, ну пищевод хотя бы точно можно, значит. Я вас не понимаю. То есть слово, да. Вот не, до себя он так. Ну это ложь, это условно просто, так скажем, что ничего не потребляя, как бы, жить, это надо понимать, да. Потреблять это значит делать что-то какое-то добро, ну я про себя говорил, это уже, да, вот это, ну да. Ты, а тело, то есть как бы ладно, условно так, да, то есть все, летать будешь, парить будешь, не забывай, да. Да, он нас надел, он нас... Но все равно, ну как ты сам, ну так дальше иди, да. Тело твое все равно должно что-то кушать и пить и так далее. Да. Это нормально, если ты работаешь, да. Даже если ты не работаешь, все равно как бы это, понимаю. Но я не знаю, вот это сложно уже, да. Ну, по идее, может и так, если ты был на биозе ходит, то может и так даже. А зачем тебе это? С какой целью-то? Если не убеждает. Ну, давайте продемонстрируем. Петрович у нас ладно. самый, да. Еще простудишься, как, Смотри, моя версия такая. Женщины, они очень чуткие и беременные. Все, точка. Это мы, да. Значит, здоровье надо лечить. Ну, видимо, так. Ну, чтобы... Зачем? Я не знаю, зачем вы сами отвечаете. Очень плохо, да? Так, скажи тогда. Понимаешь, это вот попробуй вот так вот поговори, уйди куда-нибудь на работу, попробуй посмотри, что у тебя понимаешь. Как бы да, типа, я понял уже просто. За будешь хасид, короче, как это называется, за истину поляжешь. Или юродивый хотя бы какой-нибудь типа того. Я понял. Раньше времени сговорим, ты что раз. Ну и что теперь, если это говорят, да. Гипотетически, да, они важны, все равно тебя, да, понимаешь. А все, ты же есть, это что я проблема, на самом деле. Как ты работаешь, да? Наверное, не знаю. Ну, их нет, это плохо, конечно, да. Ой, не понял, все просто. Понимаешь, ну если так все хорошо, где мои деньги тогда? Да, вот я понял. То есть как бы немножко лучше, чем ты ожидаешь, на самом деле. Ладно, ждать. Ну что я как бы, ну, понимаю. Кто знает, может ты сам, ну, понимаешь, что да. свои трюки-то надо. Ну да. связано, да, так, наоборот. Куда пойдете? Что сами? Себе так себе так думаю. Ты не болеешь просто. Рука не умеет, ты не умеешь. Как голову берет, не знаю. Не бывает такого, неужели это правда, наоборот, вот она говорит, вот да. Серьезно, что ли? Ну, да. А что она должна говорить? Ну, ничего. Ну, позвонил даже. Ну, наоборот, потому что. идеально, да, мы идеально, пара, что просто пара. И я только этим занимаюсь, наверное, слушай, я только живу и больше всего вообще ничего не делаю уже. Такая, ну, каждый день, представляешь, какая сволочь, не живет еще. Лучший друг, товарищ, да, все-таки, да. Доведет до добра, да, стервик, да. Можно еще лучше, значит. Минут по существу и вообще просто вообще так, что вообще. А вот видишь, как мир устроен, так вот на самом деле. Несмотря на то, что ты, да, понял, да. Да. Прям мечтаю, да, понял. Так нет, понимаешь, там, да нет, да. Ну, я просто надо затащить, да, это не знаю вас. Кушать. Майонез. Не надо, потому что уже есть, все равно уже есть. Почему мне не трекай? Я растяну. Вот нет, наоборот, слушай, вот это бакой. Растяну. Я затяну, а я растяну. А я притяну. Я втяну. Ростес. Действительно, да. Что-то забыл. Меня на работу не обязательно документ. Мне деньги нужны, мне нужна. Я не стремлюсь идти в батраки какие-то, в рабство, я просто делать то же самое, но за деньги. Ну, не то же самое, но тем более даже еще лучше, да, я понял. Ну, я понял, да. Второе меня не касается, может, ну, да. Ну ты так не думаешь, потому что, да, я не тупой, я знаю, что это, да, понял. А что ты, массаж пальцев, массажер каждый день. Нет, что ли? Вот я просто про себя говорю. Ну нет, наоборот, вот это она имеет в виду. Наоборот, потому что мне понравится это все. Истинно с вами. Понравилось, да набирала. Вот я понял. Я тебе говорю, что для меня это круто, тебе может не понравиться. Кто тебя знает. Хорошо, сейчас, вот я прямо сейчас на свободных полях. Где мои деньги? Ну и так, себя Да. просто, смотри, можно жить и никого не убивать, никого не притеснять. Ты согласен? Нет. Жить и работать и вообще, да, и все нормально. Нет, нельзя, нельзя тогда. Ну а те, кто хотят воровать, они хотят, да, понимаете, просто, да. Ну, я тебе про себя и говорил, да. Ну это же, да. Заряд сразу ты себе наоборот, так про себя думаешь. Нет, понимаешь, какая ситуация? Я в расчет не беру тех, которые шантропа, как бы, да. С ними отдельно общество думает, почему так получается, там, и понимание. А вот пока отдельный вопрос. Я тебе просто говорю, что, да, тебе зачем про белую обезьяну думать? Да, то есть, говорится, везде пух найдет, меня не касается, я вообще в целом. Это все понятно. Я говорю, вот ты нормальный человек, я пока не беру, если ты гопник, я не беру в расчет. Я говорю, вот ты просто обычный человек, да? Да, то есть можно жить и работать, да, то есть, ну ты не понимаешь, что такое работать, да, понимаешь, реализовываться, значит, быть уникальным, да, уникумом, да, мужиком, это же, не понимаю, ну да, не знаю, тут, ну а чё, ты просто, все равно, ты чем бы ни занимался, надо вырасти хоть какой-нибудь бригадир, ну, не знаю, понимаешь, куда угодно, понимаешь, но вырасти надо, понимаешь. А кто тебе даст начальника цеха, если ты болван какой-то, да? То есть, понимает он тебя. Надо быть как бы, смотри, если ты умеешь людей завести, там, ну, то есть какие-то качества надо в себе вырабатывать, правильно? Неспокойным каким-то движением, да. И можно это делать всю жизнь, не только можно, она будет, понимаете, и так далее, да. То есть мечта, понимаешь? А еще лучше, а по-настоящему, вот за что ты доброе стоишь, да? То есть, вот за что ты стоишь вообще в целом-то? Ну, я просто говорю, что вот, теперь как бы понятно, а теперь воровство, что это нафиг это все, а вот тебе когда жить надоедает, ну да, ну понимаешь, да, то есть, вот это он имеет в виду. Нет, я имею в виду, что жить можно вообще, всю жизнь можно жить, вот как вот ты живешь, вот и жить можно, понимаешь? Да, не понимаешь, что это, ну да, то есть не отказывать, ни в чем себе не отказывать, не понимаешь? Ну да. А теперь как бы, ну понимаешь, да. А воров никто не рассматривает, они узники свои, какие-то смерти, совести, или черт их знает, кого там. Это не важно. Да. Они точно такие же люди, просто более, так скажем, темные, скажем, зовут. Да. И все равно путь такой, у тебя больше нету путей, только так, да. Общество реализации, смотри, репортер, например, стать репортер, еще что-нибудь, да? Да, понимаешь, очень ценно, да, вообще вот эти, ну понял, да. Да. Я за то, что нормально можно жить, даже можно без войны почти что жить. Ну, так не будет, чтобы вообще просто так, ну так типа того, да, понимаете. Да. Ну, типа я понимаю, просто, да. Нет, а чё, это тебе даже, да, ну как бы просто нормально это оно растет. Ну ладно, это он про себя уже говорит, ну не важно. Просто как бы, да, что-то я... Не регионе. Не надо и говорить просто. еда. Да. Нам, круглая еда. Круглый стол. Аккуратными глазами. Это не так. Ушьятываюсь. It is so edible. Unforgettable. Unforgettable. Gringo, unforgettable. Fantastico. Formidabile. Looks great. Я плохо человек, нехороший. Нехороший человек, круглый. Лук почти съеден. Я столько лука покупал, он почти формальдегидный был. Formal edible. Не понимаю. Не понимаешь. Eligible. Да.
Still plays like an inferior clone of Metroid, violence and all. The way we approach and play these games
This video was
often
sponsored
feels
by
much
Novo
more
Resin.
similar than their mechanics would
If you have a
become.
paper and pencil nearby, go ahead and put 4 dots anywhere on the paper and connect them to make a quadrilateral. It doesn't matter how weird the shape is, and I'll just put a few examples here to illustrate that point. Now put a dot at the midpoint of all of those line segments you just drew and connect those to make another quadrilateral. Turns out no matter what, connecting those midpoints will always yield a parallelogram, or shape where opposite sides are parallel to each other. The reasoning behind this is a theorem that says if you connect the midpoints of 2 sides of a triangle, that line segment will be parallel to the third side. I could then just form another triangle which shares that third side, and then connect those midpoints you see here. So again, as a result of that theorem I mentioned earlier, these 2 line segments you see here are parallel to the third side, which means they're also parallel to each other. Then if I connect the other 2 corners, I can make the same argument, which gives us 2 new parallel line segments, leaving us with a parallelogram. What we just solved was math in 2 dimensions, something that could be done on a flat piece of paper. We'll soon get to 3 dimensions though, which we can of course grasp since the space we live in is 3-dimensional. But once we move to higher dimensions, you'll see the intuition is mostly gone, leaving us to rely on mathematical analysis, which can still be done without that intuition. But to set up a lot of what's coming, I'm first going to ask, how many different types of three-dimensional dice are possible to make? Now, I'm using the word dice pretty loosely here, because what I really mean is three-dimensional polyhedra that meet certain criteria. The first one is that every face must be a regular polygon, and the same regular polygon. So, for example, this cube, or a die we're familiar with, is an example of this, as every face is a square with the same sides and same angles. The second criteria is that the same number of faces must meet at each vertex, or each corner. For a cube, that would be 3. And then the third is that shape must be convex, so it can't look like this or anything. So including the cube, how many three-dimensional objects fulfill all these requirements? Well, I've got a few here that do. Like a tetrahedron, which has 4 faces that are all equilateral triangles. We of course have the cube. Here's the octahedron that's also made of equilateral triangle faces, except 4 faces meet at a corner here, not 3. There's a dodecahedron that has 12 faces, which are all regular pentagons. Then we've also got the icosahedron, which has 20 faces. But how many more are possible? I mean, in 2 dimensions, you can have infinitely many regular polygons, or side lengths and angles. But when it comes to putting those on the faces of a three-dimensional polyhedron, what is possible? Well, this is it. These are the 5 platonic solids, the only shapes that meet the criteria we discussed earlier. That's definitely not obvious. For example, I found it weird that we can't have a die with hexagons as faces. Okay, well, we can, like this one here, but as you can see, there are pentagons as well. So it doesn't meet that requirement having the same regular polygon on each face. Now, this is the point where I was going to do a proof as to why there are only 5 platonic solids, but I decided to do a dedicated video just for that. So if you want to see, you can click here or down in the description. However, we will do a little more analysis with these shapes. Take a look at the vertices, edges, and faces of each solid. There's something these all have in common, and it's not obvious at first. But if we subtract the edges from the vertices and then add the number of faces, in each case the value comes out to 2. This relationship of vertices minus edges plus faces is known as Euler's characteristic. Yes, another one of his. And it turns out for any convex polyhedron, Euler's characteristic is 2. In fact, even for a sphere, with regards to the surface, Euler's characteristic is still 2. And that's because a sphere can be morphed into any convex polyhedron, aka these shapes are homeomorphic, and Euler's characteristic is preserved under homeomorphism. But things get even weirder when you realize...
Трогает меня просто. Нет, не думаю, там
But
тебе
they all have a central struggle that focuses on you. Access account, dev view, just to give ourselves.
Нет, не надо, не надо.
Hello everyone, my name is Jamie Smith and welcome to Devlog Zero about my game, The Endless Arc. The Endless Arc is an action-adventure roguelite involving random generation and a mix with the adventure genre. Game programmer Ara is forced into the vibrant and quirky world of the Ark, a game of her own creation. Yeah, she is stuck inside her own game. I really took to games like Enter the Gungeon, Forager, Heartbound, and Garden Story, since this game is basically a combination of adventure and dungeon-based gameplay, with a wholesome experience blended in. Now, there's much more to it that makes it unique, so be sure to listen up. But the way the game will work is you can go into dungeons, fight enemies, unlock new items and weapons, all that stuff, but also unlock new adventure areas. And these Crash Bandicoot-inspired slots on these portals will have something to do with that. You can then explore these areas, progress the story, utilize what you've already unlocked and the skills you've gained to go further into these places. And who knows what waits on the other side? I'm super excited to share this with you and the progress I've made so far, so please join me on this quirky and fun game dev journey. I will leave timestamps through the video so you can skip to a part if something doesn't interest you. So before the Endless Arc even existed, I started making a prototype for a big adventure game I had in mind. I was in my final year of university at the time and I had to create something for my dissertation. And after seeing the potential of Undertale and how fun it was, also being made by a solo developer, I felt that I wanted to give it a try. I mean, how cool would it be to make a game and for so many people to enjoy it and make a living in the process? Now, I will say this, being a solo developer is not easy. I've started to move away from that a bit myself because I know it's easy to manage and the end result will be much better, so I've started building a small team. The only problem with this project was that the scope of the game was too big. An open world adventure game, well, I made like what? One rough game a long time ago? It doesn't make sense. So let's skip ahead about a year. I used to make Let's Play videos on YouTube, and I was one of the first to make a video on the game Hardbound. The main developer, Thor, reached out to me to use my video on Steam. I eventually joined the Discord server, and after a period of time, he started a game jam of his own. I wasn't going to join at first, but his advice in making small games to start off with really resonated with me. April 23rd, I submitted a game prototype for the first Para Software Game Jam. This was the very first version of the Endless Arc, and I went into it very optimistic. I wanted to make something like a roguelite with random level generation, and yeah, that turned out to be way out of my reach. But somehow I found someone who was able to help me get a rough form of random generation together. I ended up being a runner-up for the game jam, which really motivated me to push forward with the project, and I decided to put the other game, the massive, big, open world game, on hold. And that's where this story officially begins. Ooh. On a side note, I do have a Discord server. You can join if you want to see updates or just come to chat with the community. It's a really nice place, trust me. The goal for this game was a randomly generated experience, which was new every time you played it. Basically a roguelike, but there wasn't really anything special about this game just yet. That wasn't until I started adding a bunch of other stuff. Now, I am aware of feature creep, and I've avoided adding certain things and taking some away. I've been down that rabbit hole before, and I'm more prepared this time. There's a few core features I wanted to stick by. Variety, exploration, and wholesomeness. Now, I enjoy a range of genres, from games like Spyro, Garden Story, Heartbound, to others like Binding of Isaac and Into the Gungeon. I wanted a game that really fits what I enjoy, in the hopes that this combination will be something others enjoy too. Let's talk about roguelite. Now, this section embodies the variety aspect. So, the roguelite aspect involves what you'd expect, but in a chunk sort of way. Think of the game Forager, a super fun game that involves purchasing new islands, chunks, to find new things and to expand your world. So let's go to the portal room quickly. There will be multiple different portal entrances to different dungeons. Now, this allows the player to choose which order they play through the dungeons. This could be important depending on what they have currently equipped, or if I decide to add in elements, which I'll talk about later. So I'm taking this chunk idea of Forager and combining it with the diversity of Enter the Gungeon's room generation to create a random dungeon generation system that allows you to choose which path you want to take by purchasing them with a currency you can gain through different methods. There are different shared chunks which can sometimes contain different things, and it also helps to diversify the rooms so it doesn't get boring. For this, I'm using GM Room Pack by Yellow Afterlife. Now this is honestly the biggest lifesaver because even with the help of my assistant programmer, I was finding it very hard to develop a dungeon generation system that worked nicely. Now bear in mind, I am not that good at programming in Game Maker Studio 2, and I don't even have a programming background. But I have gotten better since I've been making the game, but I do have a long way to go. I'm more of an arty guy myself. Now then, what would a roguelike be without weapons and items? Only this time I'm calling them mediums and charms. So I chose the name mediums because the fairy Somna, who travels with Aura on the journey, is able to possess objects you find and utilize their magic to shoot a variety of projectiles. Now this just helps give a reason for why you're able to do certain things, rather than just, dying and resurrecting like a game. Even though you're in a game, there's a reason behind the things you do. Now, in terms of the weapons and items, I'm planning to have a lot of these, since weapon and item variety and combination is super fun, and it's super cool to see strategies players come up with. Okay, so the idea in the back of my head is to utilize an elemental system like Genshin Impact, where weapons and elements of different reactions can occur depending on the element of the weapon, the enemies, the environment, or elemental afflictions. So these could affect both the player, the enemies, and possibly the environment, which could really add some strategy and cause the player to be a little more careful with their actions. As I said though, the idea is on the back burner for now. I want to get the main demo done first until I feel that I'm happy with it, and then add the extra features on top. So the adventure section, this embodies exploration. I wanted there to be more to do outside of just dungeon diving over and over. It's nice to take a breather sometimes and see what else there is that could help you progress the game or explore the world. Firstly, we have the main hub. I want there to be lots to do here, but not too much as to get the player confused and lost. So we have a few characters in their houses, some unlockable areas, the portal to the dungeons, there will be some secrets scattered around, and also this cliff with vines. Now this leads down to the beach. Right now this isn't too important of an area, though there is another unlockable area here, and also another house, which has a very cool feature. Oh my god, soon! The unlockable areas are going to be heavily focused on being able to explore, fight roaming enemies, finding new stuff, also story progression and possibly bosses depending on the area. I guess something like a Zelda experience. I haven't completely figured out these areas just yet since they won't be in the demo, but I'm hoping that being able to explore the main hub, the houses and the beach will be enough to satisfy players in the demo to get a feel of what exploration truly be. On to wholesomeness. So the obvious ones, no guns, no blood, no killing of animals or other people inside the game. It's all canonically a bunch of pixels in game code, and the fact that I'm combining two different genres together helps to achieve that, since you have the time to relax, explore, and interact with other characters and objects if you want to, or dive into dungeons and play over and over to get the best run possible and unlock even more content. Also, the art style and settings of the levels themselves are also very colourful and rich in nature, which really helps to define what kind of game this is. For example, if my game had sharp edges, dark colours, and certain design choices, it may lead you to believe it to be a violent game, a lot of combat, or feel very dark in nature. The fact that I've chosen a lot of bright colours and rounded happy clouds, for example, helps create a completely different feel. Also, none of the characters in the game are truly evil. The virus that is trying to take over everything isn't evil either, really. You may come to hate it, and I don't blame you, but it's just doing what it's been made to do. Check out the movie Summer Wars. That was a big inspiration for this. So it doesn't hate, love, or really care about what it does or doesn't do. Also, I wanted to include some really cool guest features in my game. So I have planned our Krabby from Nisho Island, made by Cheeky Lords, and Norman the Frog from A Frog's Tale, made by Norman. The games and the people are pretty awesome, so I'll link them in the description for you to check out. Please do. Also, there's a cool feature at the beach in Blueberry's house called the Slime Haven. You'll be able to save slimes throughout the game world, and they'll end up here. You'll get extra bonuses in some form, but I won't say too much about this right now. So, what's next? Next up is to work towards actually completing the demo. There's still plenty to do, and I want it to be as good as possible so that the response from it is as good as possible. After the demo, I'll likely work towards a Kickstarter campaign, but I won't think too much on that right now. Basically, I just need to get everything completed that exists in the game at the moment. That includes artwork for the character houses, weapons and charms, make sure they work properly for the dungeons and combat, character dialogue, portraits, anything unfinished. My main focus right now is going to be the artwork, since I feel that I overwhelmed myself before with everything that had to be done, and I took a bit of a break to kind of deal with other stuff in real life, but I did get back into making gaming videos again, which is super fun. Now I'm really looking forward to making more of these, and I hope you are too. So let me know what you think in the comment section, and be sure to check out my Twitter or Discord server. I also have a Patreon if you fancy supporting, checking out stuff early. As always, believe in yourself, never give up, and I'll see you next time!
So in the last episode, Yeah, whoops, sorry. Everything was going so well, and then I just suddenly felt tired. There were several things that happened that kind of killed my motivation to do anything. But I really care about this project, and I thought it'd be damaging to the project if I worked on it while I'm not enthusiastic for it. So I just waited, and my enthusiasm just came back one day, just out of nowhere. But think about it this way, if somebody's really thirsty, the longer you go without giving them a glass of water, the more they're going to want it and appreciate it. And so imagine you wait 5 months without giving them a glass of water. They're really going to appreciate that. And thank you again for all being so amazing. We went from 3,000 to 20,000 subscribers last episode. And so imagine if that's you, then this is 10,000, and then 20,000 is two. So in the last episode we added ground pounding, diving, rolling on surfaces, a bunch of animations, rolling out of dives, diving off of walls, and in this episode we're going to be making things good rather than bad, which they currently are. And what I mean by that is, while things may look like they're working on the surface, under the surface they're kind of rushed and messy.
Can you imagine having a career that's so fulfilling that you actually love going to work, but also having a career where you get to choose your own hours, you get to work from home, and you get to earn more money?
While undoubtedly a throwback to the charms of the 8 and 16-bit era of gaming, the pixel art style continues to be a firm favourite amongst developers, publishers and players alike, and in early 2021, well, there's no sign of a slowdown in new pixel art games. With that in mind, we're taking a look at 25 pixel art titles, the ones we're most looking forward to playing, that with any luck are releasing later in the year. Now let's get things started off, and in no real particular order, at number 25 with Garden Story. Here you'll play the part of a newly appointed guardian of a village in what's a social simulator action-adventure RPG, with an emphasis on you helping out your local community. Players will traverse. As we wind down to the end of the year, it's time to take a look at some of our most wanted games expected out in 2021. Hi there and welcome again to Get Indie Gaming, and to the first of a 5-part series, where we show off some of the best looking indie games likely to launch next year. While some you've likely to have seen before, we're confident this series will show off plenty new titles to go on your wish list. And on that, let's crack on with the rundown. Let's begin, and in no particular order, we have You Suck at Parking, which in my case is entirely true in the real world. Expected out at some point next year, and dubbed here in the press release as the most extreme parking game, and the only one of its kind with an objective at some point to find a place to park up, it's essentially a fun and vibrant looking racing game where you need to get from point A to point B without crashing or exploding or have anything else really get in your way. We suppose one of the best ways in describing this one, and at the time the video airs you can play a short but enjoyable demo on the game's Steam homepage, well, it's just so delightfully silly. We adore the playful nature of the graphics and the cars and other vehicles that remind us of the box stuffed full of Hot Wheel racers we have somewhere up in the loft. You Suck at Parking is expected to come to PC via Steam, and like we suspect many of you watching this video, we'd love to see it also come to the Switch.
Did you know? ClickUp adds new features every week. So you can do incredible things like schedule project timelines, see who's online right now, and understand team performance. New features every week. ClickUp.
Expected out at some point in the spring of next year. At number 9, Growbot is a distinctive point-and-click adventure with some of the prettiest artwork we've seen in ages, particularly within the delightful-looking characters and backgrounds, with perhaps the exception of one other game featured later in this rundown. Aside from the artwork, Grobot looks ready to deliver a really interesting overall story where you play as Nara, a Grobot within a space station who's in training to become a ship's captain. Like others, our first thought upon seeing Grobot was how it gives us a feel of Machinarium, with the puzzle aspects looking simple and yet engaging enough, where you'll be tasked with, amongst other things, arranging flowers into the correct order, push and pulling of levers here and there, and manipulating and matching objects from about the place. So yes, Grobot looks pretty special, and will be headed to PC via Steam. From one visually endearing game to another, Endling is headed over to PC by way of Steam, and also coming to the Xbox, PlayStation, and the Nintendo Switch. Endling is a 3D side-scrolling survival adventure game, all seen and told through the eyes of what's said to be the last fox on Earth, as she looks to provide food, shelter and safety for her pups. By day you'll hunker down in your shelter, and by night you're aiming to move with stealth from place to place, ever watchful that each move could be your last. Said to be an eco-conscious project designed to leave a lasting impression on players, Endling is currently listed as coming out soon. Is this a day one buy for you? If so, be sure to let us know down in the comments. Moving on, and at number 7, There Is No Light is certainly a far more gritty looking affair than the first few games in this little rundown. There Is No Light is a brutal action-adventure game that's set in a grim underworld ruled by a group called the Church of the Great Hand. There's a demo you can play right now on the game's Steam homepage, and having spent a good while with this, the pixel art graphics, characters and backgrounds are stunningly done, as is the combat, which, as we've already mentioned, feels exceptionally brutal, with players needing fast reactions and a deft touch to avoid a quick and violent death. With horror sections, plenty of boss battles, There Is No Light is expected next year onto PCs via Steam. From one gorgeous looking pixel art and brutal fighter to another, at number 6, Death Trash has been in development for more than 5 years and is the work of a single developer. Unlike all of the other games within this forthcoming series, Death Trash is the only one that's expected out in 2021 within early access. Longer term viewers of the channel will know we've covered this one a few times, although if you're new here or new to the game, we think you might like it, even though, well, it does look a touch grisly and macabre. The game features an open-world single-player environment with what's called a strong story campaign and optional local co-op. Looking at the recent developer update posted on Steam from late October, the developer has mentioned the game has plenty of personality, the combat and controls feel good, and that the local co-op mode is fun, although there is still room for improvement. To be honest though, based on what we've seen of this one so far, we don't mind waiting for this to come when it's good and ready.
Как устроена образовательная платформа geekbrains? Учим на основе образовательных...
This is the story of a little juggler's girl. Trapped in her life, she wanted to see the world.
At number 5, and something we think will be new to most viewers here on Get Indie Gaming, we have A Juggler's Tale, which might be coming out next year, although we have the suspicion it may pop out to the year after next. Either way, we wanted to give this 3D side-scrolling, story-based puzzler just a little signal boost. There's something about all of this that's just ever so slightly unsettling. You play as a string puppet called Abby, held captive within a circus. One day she escapes and sets out to explore what she finds to be a war-torn, ravaged medieval fairy tale, avoiding bandits, crossing rivers and generally keeping herself safe and well. Said to be a story about hope and empowerment, we're perhaps most looking forward to see how the puzzles will work out, all the while using what's said to be a unique string puppet-based gameplay mechanic. Expected to come out when all the knots are tied for PC via GOG and Steam. And Steam. Next, and the latest game from Swery, The Good Life is expected to launch in the summer of next year onto the PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and the Nintendo Switch. A long time coming, this was first kick-started in 2017 to the tune of nearly $800,000. The Good Life tells the tale of a photojournalist called Naomi Hayward from NYC, who's in town to investigate a place called Rainy Woods, which is the so-called happiest town in the world. Given this game is from Swery, we can perhaps expect it to be a tad odd here and there. We already know Naomi soon discovers the villagers are able to transform into cats at night, and soon Naomi is able to join them as either a cat or a dog, each of which brings new and different gameplay elements. Will you be quick and nimble like the cat, or use your canine sense of smell? Amongst the investigation of the town, there seems to be plenty of other things to get up to, and like all games from Swery, for us, The Good Life will be a day one by. At number 3, and remember, this rundown and the other videos in this series, once they drop, will be in no real order of preference. Eastwood... has been a firm viewer favourite here on Get Indie Gaming since we featured it around this time last year. With a Steam page listing as coming soon, Eastwood is one heck of a stunner to look at, and will see you embark on a journey through a society that's on the brink of collapse. The human population is almost dwindled to nothing, and a deadly toxic presence has spread that destroys everything in its path. That's where you come in, to fight it all off and all the other nasties while solving environmental-based puzzles. You want dungeons? Well, Eastwood has those too, as well as a quirky cast and places to visit. Eastwood is expected soon onto PC. At present, there's no word of console releases. At number 2, and just sit back and take a look at this one. Dordogne is a story-driven adventure game where you play as Mimi, a 32-year...
Ты посмотри, кто такой-то вообще, блин. Да нет, он знает уже просто. То есть, как бы, да, понимаю. Ты ставишь. Ну, с кем? Зачем, не говори-ка, мы зачем это проходим, правильно? Понимаю, там шутит уже только да. Ну нет, почему? Ну как бы так. Все равно делать нехрен, правильно? Ну типа того, до кучи. Ну да, понимаю, себя. Кому надо и так он знает сам, понимаешь? Здоровому человеку будет интересно, понимаешь? Ты уже слышишь меня, правильно? Рано или поздно. Мне же интересно, например, и это интересно, и это. Но я туда не буду вмешиваться, потому что, во-первых, денег нет на это. То есть, как бы, во-вторых, это самое... Ну не надо говорить просто и все. Потому что жизнь лишняя, понимаешь? Лишней жизни нет у человека. Ну да, это уж сами меня не касается. Ну что хочешь сказать? Вот вдруг тебе не нехрен, вот ты смотри, вот как знаешь славянскую, да, вот сдохнешь, узнаешь, что тебе, оказывается, не нехрен делать-то было. Можно было вообще, да. Еще как ого-гоюшки можно было вообще. Ну, Нет. Характер мешает немножко, да? Наоборот? Наверное. Ладно, слишком хорошо. Это я так все. Я все придумал. Просто так, со злобы, короче, вообще нет, даже мне чуть не это самое. Мне уже самому не интересно, что ну, не важно. Может, никто не знает. Нет, ну не то, что не интересно. Ну ладно, ну ладно. Чтобы жить нормально, надо сначала жить, скажи. Да, понимаю. Ну, что тебе могу сделать? Я вообще не живу до этих того. Верно? Традиция у нас такая. Ну, не знаю, а что тебе? Как понимаешь? А почему такое состояние, что все пронеслось, и ты как бы, а что нахера вообще? Такого нету, что ты вот, ну да, вот я понял. Ну вот я понял. Ну так может тогда не будешь задавать вопросов? Как так тогда не о чем говорить, понимаешь? Он тебя понимает. Работать.
Year-old woman visiting the house of her recent game where you back and take a look at this one. Dordogne is a story-driven adventure game where you play as Mimi, a 32-year-old woman visiting the house of her recently deceased grandmother. Mimi used to spend her summers with her grandmother, who, before passing, left Mimi a series of letters and puzzles, and in so doing, remind her of her life. Play as the older and younger Mimi in what looks more watercolour than video game. One of us here in our little team likewise used to spend the summers down there in the south of France, and every time they look at this game, they say they can almost feel the warmth of the early evening sun on their faces as they recall sitting alongside the river or having yet another cheeky little piece of French pastry before settling down to a hearty but fresh summer evening meal. Quite simply, we've not seen anything like Dordogne before and really can't wait to see yet more from it. As for a release date, well, there's a hint here and there of a 2021 time frame, although we can happily wait and sit back all the while to play once it's good and ready on either the PC or the Nintendo Switch. At number 1, and bookending the first video in this 5-part series of games we most want to play in 2021 or perhaps beyond, Sable has, like a few others, been on our wish lists for quite some time. With an art style that feels vaguely familiar, Sable is expected out next year, with it bringing a coming-of-age tale of discovery through an open-world desert landscape that's full of ancient relics from the past. While travelling across the desert, you'll come into contact with nomadic clans to learn their tales in what's said to be a deeply personal quest about self-discovery. Sable is expected out first on PC and onto the Xbox One and Xbox Series X and S. So there we go, we're out of time on this, the first of a new series of our most wanted games out in 2021 and perhaps a little beyond. With 4 more episodes due before the end of the year, which games are you most wanting to play? Leave us a comment, and if you like this video, click the like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. A subscription with all the notifications turned on is the easiest way to stay up to date.
Ну, он понял тебя. Да нет, она тебе... Ух ты. Что-то русское. Все, спать пора. 12 часов. Это со мной? Кто это такой? Кто? Это кто вообще? Это никто. Это что? Даже... Частичное, частичное. Кто это? Слово. Нет, я слово этих, не знаю. То есть, у нее нету этих штучки, нет? Не наоборот. А, ты какая девочка? Нет, это другая. Да. Мне не нравится. Ладно, забудь. Нет, смотри, я тебе точно гарантирую, вот смотри, экологичное отношение как бы к женщине там, то есть это я тебе точно говорю, вот вообще, ты даже тут меня не сможешь победить, то есть как бы ты даже нечего побеждать, только получается, что ты себя победишь. То есть женщина должна быть беременной, ну, я имею в виду там, даже не важно, я тебе не говорю даже, что там она жена, там бла-бла-бла, понимаешь, то есть, нет, я имею в виду те, которые ты как бы типа отношения строишь с которыми, как, ну как это называется, ты понимаешь, короче. Да. Это точно я тебе говорю. Да. Да, понимаю. Ну, коллеги, они как бы мужского, ну, они как бы условно мужчины, как бы, понимаешь, считаются. Ну или бесполые, ну, типа, условно, так скажем, да. А ты сам решай, как ты с ними больше. Ну, наверное, лучше бы вместо них были мужики, понимаешь? Вот тогда вот вместо 10 женщин один мужик бы справился. Ну так, наверное, я не знаю. Как бы. Я тебе не просто так сказал. Ну не знаю я. Может, как ты их, что ты будешь с ними делать? Вот ничего не надо, вот у них мужья, пусть они с ними делают. Меня не касается, что ты... Ну нет, я просто... Это вообще не касается, потому что это оставим где-то там. Я имею в виду, что надо, понял, что... Ну не знаю, сам смотри. Потому что женщина везде женщина. Черная, зеленая, белая, оранжевая, с таким характером, с таким характером. Пока даже из них что-то выпадет, все равно не останутся. Ты понимаешь? Не знаю, как ты уже... Нет, это плохо и все это. Ну ладно, не ладно. Ну нет, ну ты согласись. Да. Мы размажем. Скорее всего, ты наживешься таких штучек, когда слово добра, что вообще, да. Понимаете. Надо понимать. И в конце окажется так, что только так и надо было делать, понимаешь? Это не знаю, так что... Ладно, значит, ну это так, что-то я защиту своих прав потребителей. Ладно. Понятно. Ладно. Ну не свезло мне. Айдер, да? Нет, не знаешь. Нет такого. Айдера нет, что ли? Ойдер есть? Эйдер. Айдер. Как тебя собаку звали? Белкайдер. Айдер. Женяйдер. Ладно, что там у нас? Ну да, кстати.